On the Canon 77 unboxing video, JasonNevin asked a question about what DSLR I would recommend for an entry-level beginning photographer. I'm going to give my perhaps surprising answer today here at the House of Hacks. Hi makers, builders, and photographers. Before answering Joseph's question, I want to, by way of full disclosure, kind of give a little bit of background about myself. This is of course an opinion piece, opinion answer, and so in order for you to know how to weight my opinion, my answer, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I grew up in the printing industry. My dad was involved in the printing industry. My grandfather had his own print shop, and one of my earliest memories when I was probably three or so years old was of a camera. And so I've been around cameras my entire life. When I was probably first or second grade, I got this camera. It's a 35mm, kind of a point and shoot type of deal, as my first camera. When I was in high school, probably as a freshman, I got my first SLR camera right here. And so I've been around cameras my whole life. I've been involved in the Canon ecosystem for better part of a decade now. In our household, we have four Canon bodies and a whole bunch of different lenses and accessories for the Canon system. I'm not a professional photographer, but I would consider myself a serious hobbyist. I help out teaching classes a couple times a year with our local university extension course for beginning photographers and also people new to studio lighting and flash photography. So I have a significant background, even though I'm not a professional. Now, having said that, with all the different cameras I come in contact with, I am partial to the Canon system. I think it's probably the best system historically, in terms of build quality, in terms of user interface, in terms of support and repair. It's just been second to none. Nikon is probably very close second. And in terms of technology and feature set, they historically have tended to leapfrog each other. So first Canon would be on top, then Nikon would come out with the next version and be slightly better, and they just kind of leapfrog. Now, having said all that, that's historical information. In the last couple of years, the mirrorless systems have really taken the field by storm. And in many ways, I think that they have surpassed the Canon and Nikon systems, and Canon and Nikon just simply haven't really kept up very well, I don't think. The latest releases from Canon have kind of been evolutionary improvements on what they had before, but I don't think they're really keeping up with some of the innovations that are coming out in the mirrorless market from particularly Panasonic in their Lumix and GH series cameras, and Sony with their A7 something, I forget what that is, and the other A series cameras that Sony's coming out with in the mirrorless systems. Both Sony and Panasonic technically are, I think, vastly superior cameras to the current Canon and Nikon offerings. Now, having said that, I think both the Panasonic and the Sony systems don't measure up to Nikon and Canon in terms of service or in user interface. I think Canon and Nikon both are better at positioning the buttons and how the menus are laid out, just kind of the overall user experience with their cameras. Canon being just slightly better, in my opinion, than Nikon. And of course, that could be more based on my familiarity with the Canon system than anything really objective on that. It's purely a subjective opinion. Now, having said that, the Panasonic and Sony's technically, the image quality coming out of them is far better than the Canon and Nikons, I think. So what would be my recommendation? If you're invested in the Canon system, if you're invested in a system, I would continue staying in that system. If you've got a bunch of Nikon glass or a bunch of Canon glass, just stay with that. Both systems have very solid offerings. But if you're going in new, if I was going in new, didn't have any pre-existing conditions, I would be getting a Fuji system. Fuji uses the Sony sensors, so they've got incredible images coming off those cameras. But Fuji has the best user interface. It even surpasses Canon's, in my opinion. A couple things that make it noteworthy is they have separate controls for the exposure triangle. You have a separate knob for ISO and for shutter speed, and the f-stop is a ring on the lenses, just like the old film cameras were. So everything you need for exposure is right there with a haptic feedback in a manual knob. And I think this just puts it ahead of all of its competition across the board. Also, Fuji has a great menu system. The menus are laid out in a way that's easy to access the things that you commonly access, and the things that are custom, that are more detailed, are layered in a way that is easy to get to, that makes sense, and the options are comprehensible. Sometimes the other systems, particularly Sony is awful at the user interface. Their menus are terrible, and finding things and configuring a Sony camera is a very, very frustrating experience. So if I was going in new, I would go with a mirrorless system with the Fuji. Their build quality is excellent, the user interface is excellent, and their images that they generate are fantastic. So that's it for today. Until next time, go make something. Perfection's not required, fun is.